She was merely a servant, they say. So why? The night she put a blade to her master's throat, did the whole plantation disappear? Eliza was who? A woman who had no history or tomb, but whose tale no one dared to share. What if freedom marked the start of something much more unsettling rather than its conclusion? To ensure you don't miss any of our investigations, subscribe to the channel right once and enable notifications if you want to follow true stories that defy time and uncover hidden realities. A plantation home known only to the locals as Bellamar formerly stood along the sultry banks of the Mississippi River, where the reeds sway like breathing specters and the water turns to mist at dawn. It has attempted to be erased by time. Its deteriorating front is devoured by ivy, and the base is covered with moss, which is nature's effort at a veil. However, some structures are not easily destroyed. Some still exist as wounds rather than as ruins. Textbooks don't mention the Bellamar narrative. It is not preserved in gleaming museum tours or honored on plaques. It endures in bits and pieces, hushed memories handed down from grandma to granddaughter. A blood-stained napkin stored in a locked box, names half-remembered. A letter was never completed. There are still some remnants of what transpired there in the fall of 1839, but time, shame, and terror have muffled it. According to St. Landry Parish's land records, the plantation was founded in 1807, a vast estate of more than 800 acres planted with indigo and cotton. Its owner, Silas Bogard, was a guy who wore lace at his cuffs but carried iron at his belt. He was born into a family of old French nobility but grew up in the harsh Louisiana sun. Even the overseers he employed were afraid of him, in addition to the slaves who toiled in his fields. Even nearby planters spoke in low voices about him, not out of deference but discomfort. His brutality increased with his money. The estate of Bogard was renowned for its efficiency, but few asked how it was kept up. Unrelenting penalties were mentioned in whispers. Whole families were split up. After sunset, strange rites were carried out deep in the sugar fields. Once, a preacher who was said to be pale and shaking came to the house to conduct Sunday service and left before sunset. He never came back. In late September of that year, Bellamar's supplies abruptly stopped, according to the sole official papers available. Overnight, the plantation ceased operations without explanation. As if it had been completely absorbed, there was nothing but absence. No sale, no fire, no combat. The character of Eliza starts to take shape in that space. Her name is listed in the ledgers without a last name. There was a note next to it, written in faded ink, that said, "Eliza, housegirl, not for auction, unstable, no further elaboration." After Silas Bogard's passing, she is not mentioned in the estate's inventories or wills. In actuality, Silas has no official death certificate. Just one entry in a family Bible with the date September 23, 1839, and the phrase "judged" next to it. People in the area tell riddles about that night. The devil came to collect, according to some. Others say a figure in white with blood on her hands encouraged the slaves to revolt and disappear into the bayous. There is no doubt that the name Bellamar was never mentioned in public again after that evening. Even now, there are signs and faint music coming from the wrecked dining hall for those who dare to travel its overgrown paths, pushing back the Spanish moss and passing through the broken archways. Half erased by time, a rusted dinner knife was etched into the wall and stuck in the flooring. Eliza was present. This is her story, and she was genuine. Bellamar is not where she was born. We know that much. In 1830, Eliza came to the plantation. A 12-year-old girl was taken in the middle of the night together with 6 other people, 2 of whom would be sold in a few days. Other than a hurriedly scrawled remark in a forgotten shipping manifest, the transaction was secret, off-record, and left no trace. No inspection, 7 units moved. Not out of disobedience, Eliza remained silent for the first year. It was as though her voice had been locked away somewhere inaccessible. At least not from the outside. According to the housemaid, she would spend hours sitting still in the laundry cellar's corner, staring at the stone wall as if they were reading letters that couldn't be seen. She never spoke in English, although several said they observed, her lips moving in prayer. They said it was old speech, a guttural creature that predates both the colonies and the ships that brought their ancestors here in chains. Eventually, she joined the house staff. Delicate tasks like cleaning silks, caring for porcelain, and polishing the carved wood furniture that adorned Bellamar's grand rooms. Activities that need accuracy, grace, and imperceptibility. The first person to notice something strange was Ami Beauregard, the mistress of the home. She experienced periods of melancholy that left her bedridden for days during one of her episodes. Eliza walked silently into the room and just stood at the foot of the bed. Pale and trembling, Amelie gazed at her and muttered, "You have the eyes." She later denied recalling the meeting when questioned. Eliza's silence became into more than just a requirement. It started to exist. In her presence, others started to speak more quietly, not out of deference but discomfort. Kids shunned her. When she died, the dogs whimpered. Her eyes never missed anything, but she never cried or laughed. The books followed. Eliza found a set of books in French, Latin, and faded English in a cabinet behind the drawing room. Who taught her to read is unknown. Perhaps Eliza taught herself, or maybe Amelie during one of her periods of lucidity. In any case, she ate them up. Something was opened by the words. Witnesses claimed to have seen her turning pages with a respect akin to religion late at night by candlelight. She was seen reading aloud from a journal that wasn't in the house, according to one overseer. She silently gave it to him when he asked for it, then just gazed at him until he left the room without saying anything more. That supervisor disappeared a few weeks later. His possessions were still there. His horse was discovered on the swamp's edge. There was no search party. Eliza's standing started to change. She was marked, or worse, touched, whispered. One cook claimed to have witnessed her sketching odd symbols into the hearth soot. According to a maid, Eliza had the ability to see deaths before they occurred and once told her calmly, "He won't see another harvest." Regarding a field and who died the following day from a snake bite, no one dared to harm her, not even Silas Beauregard, who remained at a distance despite his growing instability. Documents reveal a sharp increase in punishments throughout the plantation. During those years, shacklings, lashings, and disappearances. Silas became violent without reason, and some thought he was being haunted, while others thought he was losing his hold. One person, however, never received punishment, not even a raised voice, Eliza. It was fear, not mercy, that took root, and something that Eliza had carried since childhood started to grow inside that fear, fed by grief, silence, and the gradual accumulation of knowledge. By 1839, she had evolved beyond being a housewife. On September 23, 1839, with the typical swamp heat and the smell of iron in the wind, preparations for the evening feast had started early. Silas Beauregard, in an unusually generous mood, had called 4 neighboring planters for what he called a celebration of legacy. No one knew what the occasion truly marked. Perhaps Silas sensed the end was near. She was the shadow beneath the roof, the one who watched. It was the last supper Bellamar would ever serve. The house staff was ordered to polish all the silver, lace the table with embroidered linen from Paris, and prepare 5 courses, including a delicacy imported from the coast. Eliza, now 21 years old, was put in charge of the dining room, and not a single servant questioned it. By that time, she was moving through the house not as a servant, but as something else, a silent authority. Perhaps true to his nature, he just wanted an audience to witness one last display of power. The guests arrived in carriages that gleamed like coffins at dusk, including aging and sunburned Colonel Thibodeau, Malcolm Avery, heir to a sugar empire, Charles Dupin, who once boasted of branding a child for spilling wine, and young Elias Marchand, barely 23 with a heart too slow and a grin too quick, and they sat beneath the golden chandelier, sipping brandy as the sun bled into the cypress trees. The dining room glittered with luxury, with velvet drapes, bone china, and crystal glasses. So fine they sang when touched, but beneath it all something was stirring. Eliza moved like a ghost between the chairs, refilling goblets, adjusting silverware, her face unreadable, and then the last course, a blood orange tart crowned with a sugared rose, was served by trembling hands, with candied yams, roast duck, collard greens in lard, and an unknown red sauce that none of the kitchen girls admitted to making. Silas stood, raising his glass, and started to toast, talking about lineage, the noble burden of inheritance, of land, but as Silas raised his knife to cut the tart, Eliza stepped forward without shouting or running, and in a single motion. As smooth as pouring tea, she reached into the folds of her apron and produced a blade, slim, curved, gleaming like moonlight. It was not a kitchen knife, rather it was an older ceremonial knife, blood, and the God-given order of things. The others laughed and nodded, drunk not only by alcohol but also by the confirmation of their own unbrid dominion. Silas Bogard tried to stand, knocking over his chair, his hands clawing at the wound, but Eliza stepped back, letting him fall. In shape, etched with markings no one could read, she put her left hand on Silas's shoulder, leaned in as if to whisper a blessing, and slit his throat in front of God and everyone. The room froze. The sound that followed wasn't a scream, but rather the gurgle of Silas Bogard choking on his own blood as it splattered across porcelain and lace. The house fell into chaos. Servants fled, guests yelled for horses to stumble. Over each other, Dupin ran for the door. Marchand fumbled for his pistol but dropped it in fear. Eliza said nothing, and she just turned and left the room. However, Eliza did not run, and she went down the stairs barefoot now and moved toward the back of the property where the slave quarters gates were bolted shut. What happened next is a matter of conflicting accounts. Some say she opened the gates and the slaves poured out like water bursting a dam, while others say she called each one by name and led them through the woods in silence. Still others maintain that she stood in front of them with her hands still wet with blood and said a single word that no one dared to repeat. By morning, Bellemare was deserted. No bodies were left, and no fire had been set. The survivors never mentioned it again. Their silence, protected by embarrassment or possibly something more sinister, allowed the incident to fade into the background. However, decades later, a line in the private journals of an escaped maid was discovered, written in shaky French. "We thought she belonged to the house, but the house belonged to her." On September 24, 1839, the sun rose over Bellemare, illuminating an estate that was dense with presence but devoid of life. The 4 guests who had survived the night fled in different directions, and only 2 would ever speak of the evening, and even then, only in cryptic, alcohol-soaked fragments, long after their reputations had crumbled. One reportedly told a priest in Baton Rouge that the devil wore white and carried a blade. However, something had changed. There were no horses in the stables, no field hands in the cotton rows, no voices, no chains, just silence, vast and absolute. Wrote pages full of the same phrase, "The eyes were not hers," to an asylum in Georgia. When plantation owners from nearby estates came to investigate days later, ostensibly to maintain order, they discovered the mansion unlocked and eerily pristine. The supper table had been cleared, the blood had been cleaned, the linens laundered, as if the house itself had taken part in the erasure. Silas Bogard's body was never buried. In fact, it was never officially discovered. However, in the garden, behind a moss curtain, they found a trail of footprints that led into the swamps. Dozens of them were barefoot, deliberate, and there was no prints coming back. Rumors spread quickly, with some claiming that the enslaved people had escaped and drowned in the marsh, swallowed by gators or quicksand, and others claiming they were still alive, hidden deep within the bayou, creating a covert settlement that no white man dared enter. However, a darker theory emerged, claiming that Eliza had not released them, invoking something ancient, something buried beneath the cypress trees and stagnant waters. She had changed them. Belmar had become a site of summoning rather than liberation. Strange occurrences beset the area in the months that followed. Livestock were discovered mutilated, not by predators or blades, but with internal organs rearranged as if by ritual. Children vanished near the treine. Locals reported a low, steady humming at night that vibrated through the floorboards. No one stayed close. By the 1850s, Belmar had become a place mentioned only in cautionary tales, a ghost with a mailing address. Then, in 1871, a fisherman named Thomas L. Clerk pulled something from the swamp. Not wreckage or treasure, but bones, dozens of them, buried shallow in the mud. Belmar after dusk. Once one of the parish's most valuable properties, the property was abandoned, and its deeds changed hands several times, often to distant buyers who never visited. The remains were buried, this time under supervision, and a wooden cross was placed at the site without a name. Among them was a jawbone with filed teeth, a practice unknown in the American South but found in some West African spiritual traditions. New Orleans anthropologists tried to excavate the site but were forced to give up after 3 workers mysteriously died, one from a fever, one from drowning, and one by suicide. A group of amateur paranormal investigators later shot a brief documentary at Belmar in 1978. Only 6 minutes of the film survived. But what is left is eerie. The camera moves across the collapsed dining hall and briefly captures a figure standing at the window above. A woman in a white dress, her face obscured by shadows, before the video ends in static. No confirmed descendants of Belmar's original enslaved population have been located to this day, and genealogical records are silent. A box of damaged glass negatives was recovered from the marsh in 1932, almost a century after the night of the Last Supper. After 1839, it seemed as though an entire bloodline had been erased or veiled. But for those who live close to it, one belief endures. Eliza never ran away. Instead, she stayed, not chained, but on purpose. And at night, when the wind was blowing, just right through the reeds, some people claim they could hear footsteps circling through the shallow water and a voice, steady and faint, speaking a name no one dared to answer. One plate that refused to fade was identified as simply Belmar, 1842. This date immediately raised questions because photography had only recently arrived in Louisiana and few plantations had access to such technology. Historians were skeptical, with some claiming the negative was a hoax, but chemical analysis later confirmed its authenticity. The majority of the images in the archives of a shuttered photography studio in New Orleans were portraits of long-forgotten families, with stiff poses, empty eyes, and sepia smiles. Though their identities are unknown, facial recognition experts surmise that one of the 5 white men standing posed on the steps, all wearing suits and none of them smiling, resembles Elias Marchand, the youngest of the 4 dinner guests from 1839, whose presence in the photo, if accurate, suggests a return to the site years after the massacre. The photo was real, showing the front of the Belmar house, undamaged and eerily pristine. Behind them, in the shadows of the second-story balcony, is a woman with a rigid posture, a long, pale dress, and a face obscured by perfect darkness rather than blur, as if the light itself refused to touch it. One hand rests on the railing, and the other seems to be clutching something, a shape that some analysts speculate could be a blade, while others say it is just a trick of contrast. Digital enhancement attempts have failed. One software engineer said the distortion resembled a spiraling symbol like those found carved in the trees near Belmar's ruins. The photograph is now housed at Tulane University's special collections, but it is not on display. Her face appears to deteriorate under analysis, with pixels unraveling into digital noise. One curator said that visitors experienced nausea and vertigo after viewing the original plate, and the room where it was stored required, in the meantime. Eliza's rumors have only gotten louder over time. In the 1960s, a civil rights worker reported seeing a woman in white standing at the edge of the Bellamar ruins, silently watching. In 1987, a group of teenagers trespassing on the property heard what they thought was humming, a lullaby in a language no one recognized. One of them later attempted suicide, leaving behind a charcoal drawing of a woman with dozens of eyes and no mouth. And in 2011, a paranormal research team recorded an EVP near the site. One line, despite the graininess of the audio, is clear: "We are not gone." So who was Eliza? A spirit bound to a house that devoured everyone who entered it, a vessel of vengeance, a forgotten martyr, or something older, something that had worn her skin as a mask? We cannot say, but we know that Bellamar still stands. Its bones may be buried beneath roots and rot, but it has not released what was born within its walls. And whether Eliza is a woman, a myth, or something else entirely, perhaps this is why her name never appears in official records, why no obituary was ever written, and why the silence surrounding her is louder than any confession. Because Eliza didn't disappear. She waited, and somewhere in the static, the shadow, the blood beneath the silver, she still continues to whisper through history like a warning we were never meant to ignore.